CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it can be used to style the content on a web page. This includes things like colours, fonts, borders, backgrounds, images and so on, and it can be applied to different HTML elements. Let's have a look at an example of styling some content. So if we have a basic web page like the one you can see here, we can actually add different styles to different elements, and we can do this directly. So if we look at the body element here, we can actually add some CSS styling to this element. So here we're using the style attribute and we're setting the background color to grey. You can add multiple different styles by separating them with a colon and just adding them in the same line. So here what we're doing is we're setting the background color to grey and we're setting the foreground color to blue. Note the American spelling of color. A better way of doing this is to use the style tag and put all of your CSS styles into the style tag rather than having them in the element themselves. This makes it a bit easier to maintain. So here what you can see is we're referencing the body element and the paragraph element, and here between the braces, these curly brackets, we're listing the styles. So here you can see that for the body we're setting the background color to light grey, and then for the paragraph elements we're setting the color to dark blue, and we're adding 5 pixels of padding around the paragraphs. So the way it works here is you essentially have a selector, for example the paragraph element or a heading element, you have the braces, these squiggly brackets, and then you have multiple properties and values that you can place, separating them with these semicolons. So you put the name of the property, for example the font size, a colon, and then the value that you want. So this is going to set the font size to 14, and the next one sets the color to red, for example. And you can put these on the same line, or as you saw before, you can put them on multiple lines to make it a bit easier to read. An even better way of doing this, so best practice, is really to take all of those styles and put them in their own individual file. So here we've created a file called my_style.css, and in it you can place the individual styles. So here you can see we've taken the body and the paragraph style, but we've also got a div here as well, which is another element in HTML, and you can see that we can add multiple styles to this. So we've got background colors, we've added a border, we've set the width, and we've added padding and margin to that. So there's quite a lot of different styles that you can add to different elements to style a web page. So the idea is that you'd keep all of this style information in its own individual file, and then you would import that file into your HTML document rather than mixing up that CSS code with the HTML code. That makes it more difficult to maintain if you do it that way. Having it in its own file also means that you can share it across multiple web pages. So to do this, we'd simply go to the head section of our HTML document and we'd add a link to that CSS file in it, as you can see here. So this tells us that there's a link and that the relationship is that it's a style sheet. It tells us that it's a CSS document, and then it tells what the name of the file is as well. So in this case, my_style.css. And that means that when the head section is rendered, it will import that file, and those styles will be then applied to the subsequent elements in your HTML document. Now you've just seen how we can style elements, but what happens if you want to add styles to individual elements? So you don't want all the paragraphs to be styled a certain way, you just want one particular paragraph to be styled a certain way. Well, here we can use the ID attribute to style an individual element. An ID lets us provide our own name, so we can give any name that we like to any element that we want. And in this case, we're going to call it subpara for subparagraph. So you might want to style these subparagraphs slightly differently to other paragraphs, for example. And then if we're to go to our CSS document, we can then refer to it in the following way. So when you create your own styles using the ID, you need to precede the name with a hash. So you use the hash symbol, and then you write the name, your custom name for your element, and then you can provide additional styles as you see fit. So in this case, we're going to make the text color dark green as opposed to the dark blue color of the other paragraphs. And when we run that, you can see what it looks like here. So the standard paragraph here is in a dark blue still, but our sub paragraph is now in dark green. There's also a situation where you might want to style multiple elements with the same style, but not all elements. And to do this, you can use what's called a class. And this is not to be mixed up with the class that you hear about in object-oriented programming. So it means something different in the CSS context. So here what we've done is we're going to turn that subpara ID into a class. So the idea of the ID is it's unique and you provide a unique name. But with a class, you can use the same name for multiple elements. So here now we can apply this subpara class to multiple paragraphs. And what that will do is it will apply the same style to these 3 paragraphs. But still we can have the other style for all paragraphs in general. And to do this in the CSS file, all we need to do is change the hash symbol into a dot. So when we're using an ID, we use a hash, and when we're using a class, we use a dot. And now you can see that the 3 elements that you saw previously are all styled in dark green using our subpara class, but that the paragraph element is still styled dark blue. So unless you apply this class to the element, you'll still get the default dark blue color for all paragraphs in this HTML document. So in summary, we can use CSS to add rich styles to elements on our web pages. We can use IDs to style individual elements, and we can style multiple elements using classes. It's also best practice to separate out code into individual files. So to put your CSS styling code into a particular CSS document and then load that into your HTML document, rather than to have it all in the same document, as that's a bit messy and it's difficult to maintain.